At dawn, a lone kayaker discovers a small fiberglass boat, its engine cold, its paint sun-faded, tethered to a mangrove root. Inside, a family's scattered belongings, children's sandals, a picnic crust, a woman's locket, but no people. Then, as if the sea itself remembered, an old ship radio crackled to life. A voice, clipped and raw, spoke a name no one had heard for 18 years. Welcome to Missing Shadows, the channel that uncovers the forgotten, the vanished, and the untold. Hit subscribe, because every shadow hides a story. Her name was Alina Marquez, and she had long since stopped expecting answers. At 43, she lived in a modest Key Largo house that smelled of salt and lemon oil. Her days split between teaching marine biology at the local community college and writing quiet notes in a journal she rarely let anyone see. To most, Alina looked steady, disciplined in her work, kind to her students, even quick with a smile. But beneath that calm, there lingered a constant undertow, a pull backward to a single July evening in 2002. That was the night her brother, Miguel, his wife, Rosa, and their 2 children had vanished on a simple boating trip meant to last no more than a weekend. No wreckage had ever been found, only silence. 18 years of silence, broken only by the endless sound of waves, and her own guilt at not being on that boat. Alina had built her life around the absence. She had chosen marine biology, in part, to stay close to the water that had taken them. Every tide chart she read, every lecture she gave about ecosystems, carried a hidden double meaning, an attempt to understand what the ocean keeps and what it surrenders. Students sometimes noticed the way her voice caught when she spoke about storms or shipwrecks. They assumed it was passion. In truth, it was memory. She lived alone, though not without connections. Friends urged her to move forward, a phrase she quietly resented. There had been one man years ago, Daniel Hayes, a journalist who covered the original disappearance. Their closeness had ended when the case went cold, but the echo of what might have been still lived in her. On the morning the old radio log sparked back to life, Alina was already awake before dawn, grading papers at her kitchen table. Her coffee sat untouched, her pen tapping in restless rhythm. She didn't know it yet, but the silence she had carried for 18 years was about to break open, and with it, the fragile balance of her carefully rebuilt life. The summer of 2002 had been unforgiving in the Florida Keys. The air carried the heaviness of storms that never quite broke, the kind that pressed down on the skin and made tempers short. For the Marquez family, though, that July weekend was meant to be a celebration. Miguel, Elena's older brother, had just closed a long stretch of construction work in Miami, and he promised his kids, 12-year-old Sofia and 8-year-old Mateo, that they would take the boat out for a few days of fishing, snorkeling, and laughter. Alina remembered the night before they left. She'd sat with Rosa in the kitchen, sipping sweet Cuban coffee, their conversation drifting between family gossip and Rosa's nervous excitement about being alone at sea with 2 children. Alina had teased her, promising to come by afterward to hear all the stories the kids would collect. Miguel had laughed from the doorway, tossing Alina the spare boat key, just in case, he had said. She kept it on her keyring for years, unable to let go. On the morning of July 12, 2002, they launched from a small marina near The weather was mild, the sea deceptively calm. Other boaters recalled seeing them, waving as Miguel steered toward open water. That was the last confirmed sighting. By Sunday evening, when they failed to return, worry settled in. At first, friends assumed they'd simply stayed an extra night, enjoying the water. But by Monday, calls to the Coast Guard were made. Search helicopters combed the turquoise waves, cutters traced the reef lines, and divers scoured likely wreck zones. Nothing, not a hull fragment, not a scrap of clothing. The Marquez family had simply vanished into blue silence. Theories blossomed like dark flowers. Some whispered of sudden squalls, rogue waves, or engine failure. Others spoke of smugglers in those water boats with no lights, men with no hesitation. Still others hinted at Miguel himself, dredging up old debts and shadows he had worked hard to bury. The police report ended with the words, "Fate unknown." For Alina, fate unknown became a life sentence. She could still see the photographs taped to lampposts, the local news clips showing her tear-streaked face as she pleaded for information. She could still hear Daniel Hayes, the young reporter back then, gently pressing for an interview, his tape recorder between them on the porch as the cicadas screamed. She could still feel the ache in her chest when the Coast Guard called off the search. After 10 days, the absence did not stay confined to that summer. It bled into everything that followed. Birthdays, holidays, graduations, marked by an empty chair and a silence that made laughter feel wrong. Alina had never married, never had children of her own. The ocean had already taken a family from her. She couldn't bear to risk building another only to lose it. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, the smallest things could undo her. A child's sandal washed ashore. The echo of Miguel's favorite song on the radio. The smell of diesel mixed with salt water at the marina. They were all ghosts she carried, reminders that life could tilt into absence without warning. And so, when she heard the first whisper that a radio log tied to Miguel's boat had activated again, a pulse of fear and hope surged through her. 18 years had passed, yet the wound was as raw as the day it was cut. The morning the call came, Alina was halfway through correcting a stack of essays on coral bleaching. Her pen hovered above a page, caught in the margin between a student's half-formed thought and her own drifting mind, when her phone buzzed. The number flashing across the screen was unfamiliar, marked only with a Miami area code. She nearly ignored it. Nearly, double quotes, Ms. Marquez. The voice was male, steady, but holding something beneath it, urgency or restraint. She couldn't tell. This is Officer Jordan Price with the Coast Guard's Communication Division. I know it's unexpected, but I need to speak to you about the vessel registered under your brother's name, the Sophia Marie. For a moment, the name didn't land. The Sophia Marie had been gone nearly 2 decades, a ghost of fiberglass and salt, now more memory than matter. Elena's heart stuttered, her fingers tightening round the phone. There must be some mistake, she managed. I don't think so, ma'am. At 4:17 a.m. this morning, we received a transmission on an emergency channel. It was routed from an old maritime frequency, tied to your brother's boat ID. The message lasted 37 seconds. Alina pressed her free hand flat to the table, as though bracing against a sudden wave. What kind of message? There was a pause on the line, and in that pause lived 1,000 nightmares. It was mostly static, but a voice cut through, faint but clear enough. It repeated a set of coordinates twice, and then a woman's voice, just one word. He hesitated. It said your name. Her name, spoken across 18 years of silence. Alina couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, the phone hot against her ear, as if she might see her brother's face in her own. Are you certain? She whispered, "I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't." His tone softened. "I thought you'd want to know. We're running a technical analysis now, but Ms. Marquez, the equipment used to log that transmission went out of service in 2003. It shouldn't even be capable of powering on." After the call ended, Alina sat unmoving. Her essays lay scattered across the table, the ink of her pen slowly bleeding into one margin where her hand had frozen. Outside, the world was waking, fishermen hauling their catch, tourists gathering for reef tours, the steady hum of island life. But inside her chest, it felt as if time had cracked. She thought of the radio on Miguel's boat. She remembered the way he'd teased her when she fumbled with the knobs, insisting she learn the emergency frequencies in case anything happened. She remembered Rosa laughing, saying Alina would never need it. And she remembered the silence that followed when the Sophia Marie never returned by nightfall. She found herself standing at the marina, her fingers tracing the worn wood rail as if it might still hold some imprint of her brother's hand. The water lapped gently, indifferent, but she swore she could almost hear the faint hiss of static in the air, a voice rising just beyond her grasp. As she stood there, she wasn't alone. A figure approached, taller now, hair touched with grey but still familiar. Daniel Hayes, the journalist, the man who once stood beside her with a notebook, who had asked careful questions when no one else dared. He carried the same guarded eyes, though they softened when they met hers. "Alina," he said quietly, as if speaking her name might startle her back into the present. "I heard about the transmission. Thought you might need someone who remembers what happened." For 18 years, she had carried the weight alone. Now, with the past pressing in through a voice on an impossible radio log, she realized she couldn't outrun it anymore. The story of the Sophia Marie wasn't finished, and whether she wanted it or not, it was beginning again with her. The following morning, Alina sat across from Daniel Hayes at a cafe that overlooked the marina. Time had weathered him, softening the sharpness of his once youthful features. But his voice carried the same careful cadence she remembered, measured, respectful, curious. He still carried a leather-bound notebook, though now it shared the table with a recorder and a slim laptop. The tools of a man who had adapted but never abandoned his craft. "I called in a few favors," Daniel said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "A contact at the Coast Guard sent me a partial transcript of the broadcast. The coordinates, they point to an area 20 miles south of here. Open water, not a reef, not a channel, just sea." Alina frowned, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "That doesn't make sense. If Miguel's boat was out there, why wasn't it found during the original search?" "Exactly," Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Which means either the original search was incomplete, or someone made sure it was." The suggestion hung between them, dangerous and heavy. For 18 years, officials had insisted the case was closed. No foul play, no conspiracy, only tragedy. To question that now felt like stirring up a storm. Alina hesitated, then admitted something she had never told anyone. The night before they left, Miguel mentioned someone he owed money to. He laughed it off, said it was small, nothing serious. But I've always wondered if it mattered. Was young enough that the 2002 disappearance was just a line in an old case file. But he carried the weight of knowing the ocean seldom returned what it took. "I shouldn't even be letting you see this," he muttered, sliding a thin folder across the desk. Inside were spectrograms of the transmission, jagged lines of sound waves frozen on paper. A technician's note circled one section. female voice detected, low fidelity. Next to it, a word scrawled in block letters, Alina. She traced the letters with her finger, goosebumps rising along her arms. It was her name, pulled from static, as though the sea itself had whispered it back. Price hesitated before adding, "We checked the original equipment. It's stored in an old comms shed on base. Thing hasn't been touched in years. But when we powered it down after the transmission, it was ice like it had never been on at all." A chill spread through her. Machines didn't behave that way. People did, as they left. Daniel caught her arm. "This isn't just about ghosts, Alina. Someone went to a lot of trouble to either keep this buried or bring it back." She looked out at the horizon, where the sea shimmered deceptively calm. "Either way," she said softly, "I have to know." That night, she pulled out her old journals, the ones she had hidden at the back of her closet, written in the months after the disappearance. The pages were filled with frantic notes, storm reports, witness names, rumors she had chased in desperation. And one detail caught her eye. One she had dismissed years ago. A fisherman at the time claimed to have seen a lightless boat, shadowing Miguel's vessel as it left port. She closed her eyes, remembering how the authorities had waved it away. Too vague. Unreliable witness. But now, with Daniel beside her and the radio log whispering her name, the memory felt sharp, alive, urgent. Alina set her jaw. If the sea wasn't going to give her answers, she would have to take them. The next day, she and Daniel chartered a small research boat under the guise of a marine survey. Daniel's old contacts helped secure the equipment tan underwater scanner, hydrophones, and enough fuel to reach the coordinates. But as they prepared to leave, Alina noticed a man leaning against a piling, watching them too closely. His baseball cap shadowed his face, but the way he turned away as soon as their eyes met sent a ripple of unease through her. "Who was that?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not sure, but he doesn't belong here." The Keys had always been a place where secrets floated just beneath the surface smuggling routes. Debts collected under cover of night, favors traded like currency. Now, as the boat's engine roared to life and they pointed south toward the coordinates, Alina felt it. The story wasn't just about her brother's family anymore. Someone alive still cared, very much about keeping the past buried, and she was about to disturb it. The sea stretched endless and blue as Alina and Daniel's rented boat cut south toward the coordinates. The equipment hummed below, Deccan underwater scanner sweeping the ocean floor in pale arcs. For hours, they found nothing but sand ridges and drifting schools of fish. Alina leaned against the railing, salt spray dampening her hair, her hopes sinking as quickly as the weight they'd dropped overboard. Then, just before dusk, the scanner jolted to life with a sharp ping. Daniel adjusted the controls, squinting at the grainy image forming on his screen. "There," he breathed. "That's no reef." The outline was unmistakable. The husk of a vessel lying on its side, partially buried in sand. Fiberglass shattered, but intact enough to identify. Across the stern, faint letters still clung to peeling paint. Sophia Marie. Elena's breath caught. Her knees went weak, forcing her to grip the railing. After 18 years of absence, her brother's boat had surfaced her rather, had been waiting beneath the water all along. But something was wrong. The wreck sat too close to the surface, in water shallow enough that divers should have stumbled across it during the 2002 search. It hadn't drifted far. It hadn't broken apart in a storm. It had been here, untouched, hidden in plain sight. Daniel's jaw tightened. This doesn't add up. They combed this whole grid back then. It was logged. I checked the reports, which meant one thing. Someone had known the boat was here, and someone had made sure no one else found it. The dive itself was hurried, urgent. Alina slipped into the water with Daniel, heart pounding against her wetsuit. As they descended, the wreck came into view, silent tomb draped in seaweed, fish darting through the broken windows. She expected bones, relics of a family frozen in tragedy, but the cabin was empty. No bodies, no remains. Instead, she found something worse. Wedged beneath the captain's chair was a sealed, waterproof case. Her hands shook as she pried it open, revealing a stack of notebooks wrapped in plastic. Daniel surfaced them carefully, laying them on deck once they returned to air. When Alina peeled away the plastic, her stomach turned. The handwriting inside was Miguel's slanted, hurried scrawl. Only, the entries didn't stop in 2002. They continued. 2003, 2004, 2005, he had been alive. For years, her vision blurred as she scanned the words, fragments leaping from the page. They said we had no choice. Rosa doesn't trust them. The children ask when we can go home. If anyone finds this. No, it wasn't an accident. Elena's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the notebook. The family she had mourned for 18 years hadn't been claimed by the sea. They had been taken, hidden, forced into silence. Daniel's voice was low, almost reverent. This changes everything. She turned on him, eyes wild. It means they were alive, while I buried them in my heart. All those years, they were out there, and I didn't. Her voice broke. She pressed her fist against her mouth, trying to contain the scream building inside. Daniel gripped her shoulders, steadying her. Alina, listen. This proves it wasn't an accident. Your brother knew something. Maybe about the people he owed, maybe more. Whoever silenced this back then, they're still out there, and they just woke the case up again. That night, back on shore, Alina sat alone with the notebooks spread across her kitchen table. The pages smelled faintly of salt and mildew, but the words cut sharp and fresh. The final entry was dated 2007. If the radio works, maybe Alina will hear me. Maybe she will understand. We can't run forever. They don't forgive debts. They erase them. Her chest tightened. Miguel had tried to reach her. He had spoken her name into the static, hoping it would carry across the years. And someone with power had made sure his voice was buried. A knock at her door startled her. She froze, pulse hammering. Daniel wasn't due back until morning. Slowly, she approached. Through the glass, she saw the man from the marina, the one with the baseball cap, who had watched them leave. He stood motionless, expression unreadable, a shadow cast across his face. When he spoke, his voice was muffled but clear enough to chill her blood. You shouldn't have found that boat. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every breath feel borrowed. Ethan stood in the old gymnasium, the very place where laughter, squeaking sneakers, and the crack of basketballs once filled the air. Now, only the broken windows whispered to the wind. His flashlight beam wavered as his hand trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of what he was about to face. He had come here because of the diary, that haunting journal scrawled with confessions, names, and dates. It had pointed him back to this very building, abandoned for decades, but still holding the shadows of the vanished children. More importantly, It had led him to the name written over and over again, Clara. He heard it then, a voice, low, familiar. "You should have stopped looking, Ethan." His chest tightened as he spun around. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was Mark, his closest friend from youth, the one who had been there on the day of the disappearance, the one who swore he knew nothing. But the look in Mark's eyes told another story. "You were here that day," Ethan whispered, the realization clawing its way up his throat. "You knew." Mark stepped forward, his expression torn between shame and defiance. "I was a kid, Ethan, scared. They made me swear to silence. But you couldn't let it go. Always digging, always chasing ghosts. Don't you see? That's why your sister never came back. You couldn't save her." The words struck like a knife. His knees weakened, his vision blurred. For years, he had carried the weight of guilt, believing he had failed Clara. Now he realized it wasn't fate, it was betrayal. Ethan's voice broke. "You let her die?" Mark's jaw tightened, his silence confirming what Ethan dreaded most. Rage surged through him, raw and primal. He lunged forward, grabbing Mark by the collar, slamming him against the cracked gym wall. The flashlight clattered to the floor, rolling in dizzying circles, casting wild shadows on the peeling paint. "Tell me," Ethan roared, his voice cracking under the force of grief. "Tell me what happened to her." Mark's eyes glistened. For the first time, Ethan saw the boy he once knew buried under years of silence. "She tried to run. They caught her. I didn't stop them." His voice broke, words shattering like glass. "And I've lived with it every day since." Ethan staggered back, his hands trembling. The truth he had chased for decades had finally revealed itself. But instead of closure, it tore him apart. His best friend, his brother in all but blood, had chosen silence over justice. Tears blurred his sight as memories of Clara filled him, her laughter, her braids swinging as she ran down the school hallway, her whispered promises that they'd always look out for each other. And now, the bitter truth, he hadn't been able to protect her, because the person he trusted most had betrayed them both. Mark reached out as if to steady him. "I never wanted this, Ethan. I thought hiding it would keep us safe. But the past doesn't die. It never does." Ethan stared at him, breath ragged, body shaking. In that moment, he stood at the edge of breaking, between forgiveness and fury, between walking away and destroying the last tie to his childhood. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Then you should have buried me with her." The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, a storm raged, wind howling through the broken windows, as if the world itself was echoing Ethan's torment. He realized then that this was the moment, the point where his life, his grief, his obsession all converged. There was no going back. The truth had broken him. And now he had to decide what came after. The storm had passed by morning. Grey light filtered through the jagged windows of the gymnasium, painting the dust in faint silver. Ethan sat on the floor, his back against the wall where he had once hurled Mark in rage. His body ached, but not as much as his heart. The truth lingered in the air like smoke after a fire, heavy, choking, impossible to ignore. Mark was gone. After the confrontation, he had slipped into the night, leaving behind only his confession, his guilt, and Ethan's shattered faith. For years, Ethan had imagined this moment, the unveiling of the truth, the chance to finally know what had happened to Clara. He thought it would bring release. Instead, it felt like carrying her coffin all over again. Still, something inside him shifted. For the first time in decades, the question mark that had haunted him was replaced by a period. The wound remained raw and bleeding, but at least it was no longer open-ended, and knowledge, however cruel, was a kind of closure. Ethan rose unsteadily, clutching Clara's diary against his chest. The little book was weathered and stained, yet it was the only part of her that time hadn't stolen. He pressed it to his lips, whispering, "I found you, Clara. I know now. I'm sorry it took me so long." When he stepped out of the gym, dawn had broken. The town, silent as always, seemed less like a prison and more like a monument, a place frozen by memory. He walked slowly down the cracked sidewalk, his eyes tracing the homes where laughter had once lived. For years, he had avoided this place, but now he felt its weight settle not as chains, but as inheritance. He would never forgive Mark, of that he was certain, but neither would he spend the rest of his life chained to rage. Clara deserved more than that. She deserved remembrance, not bitterness. Ethan decided, with a heaviness that was also strangely light, that he would leave Stonebrook for good. The ghosts had been acknowledged. Now it was time to let them rest. Before leaving, he stopped by the schoolyard, the place where Clara had last been seen. He knelt in the overgrown grass, set the diary carefully at the base of the rusted swing set, and let his hand rest there for a long moment. It wasn't a grave, but it was where her memory belonged. As he stood, he felt a strange stillness. Not peace, not yet, but the first step toward it. His eyes, tired and red, lifted to the horizon where the sun finally pierced through the storm clouds. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to chase shadows. Ethan walked away without looking back. The past had taken much from him, his sister, his trust, his innocence, but it had also given him clarity. The truth had broken him, yes, but in that breaking, there was room to rebuild, and that, he realized, was the closest thing to peace he might ever find in the end. Ethan learned what every lost soul eventually must. That truth doesn't always heal, but it does free. The past will never release all its secrets, nor will the ocean of memory ever calm completely. But we are not meant to live forever in the storm. Closure is not forgetting. It is learning to carry absence without letting it consume the rest of your life, as he left Stonebrook for the last time. Ethan understood. The shadows we chase may never give back what they took, yet they teach us the weight of love and the strength it takes to let go. Because sometimes, the deepest justice is not in answers, but in finding the courage to keep living after them.